5 seconds.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nathan Bernstein. I'm here with Moshe Katz. It's Tuesday, July 10th, 2007. We're here as part of the Oral History Project for the Milwaukee Historical Society. Hi, Moshe.
Hey, Nathan.
Nice to see you.
Pleasure.
Before we get started, I'd like to just get a little bit of family background. If you could tell me a little bit about yourself, your parents, your family, and then we can kind of set the stage for talking about your passion, your kids, your community activity, and the community overall.
Great. Background. My father is Milton Katz. My mother is Jean Katz Hirschman. Both my parents, technically my mother was born in Chicago, but that's just by circumstance. They're basically Milwaukee natives. Second generation is, I'm the first of the second generation. My grandparents came to Milwaukee in the, before World War II, basically between the two wars is the best way of putting it. My grandfather was really basically the maven in Milwaukee when it came to the junk business. They had a place on 4th and Cherry called Katz Brothers. Unfortunately, he died quite young. My dad was only 15 years old when my father died. He was very much the only child in all the best and ridiculous ways that can serve. Born actually quite late in their life also, so he had older parents. I have wonderful memories of my grandmother just being the typical, stereotypical Jewish, kind Jewish mother. We moved to Israel in 1969 for a year to see what it was going to be like and ended up staying for a good number of years. And it's a memory that I have of my father. Actually, the first time I think I ever saw my father cry was on the plane because he was leaving his mother behind. So it's an image of where he was, what his background was. He's got marvelous stories. He spoke Yiddish before he spoke English. He was probably his favorite story to tell is that on one very cold school morning, my grandmother dressed him up in the first layer and then a long layer of long underwear, and then the long regular pants, and then the undershirt and the flannel shirt and the sweater over that, and the snow pants and the snow top and the vest and everything she possibly can, and a scarf and a hat and a hood. And he said, "Mommy, I have to go to the bathroom." And she undressed him all over again, and then went to the bathroom, and he came back. She says, "Well, okay, I'm ready to go to school." She says, "I'm too tired, you'll stay home today." So that's the kind of background that he had that was just very, very nurturing. There wasn't a place in the community that they didn't take him to, from every meeting at Anshe Sfard, the old one on 51st and Keefe. My parents are married at Bethel. So there's long family roots on the west side of town. My father was a typical Steuben Washington High School. My mother actually grew up in Shorewood, which was the hoity-toity neighborhood at the time. She was east of the tracks, my father was west of the tracks. And they really had a phenomenal beginning in life. My dad was very successful very young, but never really flaunted it. His thing was actually more to family and to what he could do with his money for his own family's sake. We started traveling very, very young. Started traveling to Israel when I was only 7 years old. They started traveling to Israel in 1965, so we saw places and did things in life that really very, very privileged and very, very lucky. But lived it was, I think, either Riviera or Tornado had a commercial that was understated elegance. It's kind of the life that we led. We never lived in a fancy house. We never lived in a fancy street, but always had great travels and very comfortable, nice life.
Great life experience.
Oh, it's phenomenal experiences, meeting unbelievable people. We met probably one of the greatest art collectors in Europe. My parents had a phenomenal art collection together. They've been divorced for a good number of years now, but the collection together was greater in its total parts than it is independent, but still just a wonderful collection. Got to meet some of the true great founders of the State of Israel. We were close friends for a while with Menachem Begin. It was really just a wonderful, wonderful childhood, and for that matter, a young adult life. It was great.
What was the impetus for your journey to Israel initially in 1969? Obviously, that was driven by your parents.
My parents. My father, for better or for worse, my father is very obsessive, and I don't mean that necessarily in a psychiatric term, but just that he gets into something and just sticks to it. That's the way he was with business. It's the way he was with all the different things he's been interested in life. And he got obsessed with Israel at a very, for me, at a very young age. Like I said, he went to Israel the first time in 1965 with some family friends. We went as a family in 1967. We were there, literally we were on a plane ride over when the Six-Day War broke out. Landed in England and they told us the war broke out, you can't go any further. And so we actually hung out in England, and literally 6 days later the war was over. We asked, and they told us, sure, you can go on. And we actually got to Israel, and there were still bodies lying on the side of the road in Rafiach and in Aza. And I was a 7-year-old kid, and I can actually close my eyes and see the smoldering tanks in the Sinai desert. So it was a very, very vivid experience for all of us. It was also when Israel was at its glory. It was this fledgling state that nobody could imagine would ever beat what it, against all odds, survived, and it was really a pretty spectacular experience for us. We went back again in the summer of '68, and finally, the summer of '69, my dad said, let's just try this for a year. Let's just see what happens. So he turned to his partner, Leon Joseph, who we had this amazing relationship with, great partnership, and said, I'd like to go to Israel for a period of time, and I'll come back during the winter for a month, I'll come back to the summer for a couple months, and can we see if this will work? And we stayed for 5 years. And there's no question that it was, in my formative years of life, it was the greatest impact on me. Very stressful, very intense. My brother and sister had a harder time with it in the beginning. My sister had a wonderful time, actually. She was just finishing high school when we got there. She had, I think, 2 more years of high school left. And she served in the Army, and she had some pretty spectacular Army service. Actually, technically, she was in the Air Force, and she was, at one point, liaison with Henry Kissinger. Every time he landed in Israel, she was called to action to be his liaison. And he actually hit on her the first trip, and she told him if he ever did that again, he'll never get back to Israel again. And she was called in by her superior officer, who thanked her for doing so. And the next time Kissinger came back, he actually asked for her all over again. So those are the kind of experiences that were really just hard to beat. My brother lived at Kibbutz Kfar Blum, an American program in Israel. He actually was there during the Yom Kippur War. That also was just an amazing experience for our family. We lived in a tall 7-story apartment building in Tel Aviv. And one particular night, the air raid sirens went off, and we were all told to go downstairs. And my mom just didn't want to leave. She was a Showood kid that was very much displaced, and you're not used to having blackouts and air raid sirens going off. It just isn't part of your reality. We all went down into the shelter, and I think it may have been one of the last times we actually went down there, that she just really didn't want to go down there anymore. At the same time, as a street kid in Israel, I was 12, 13, 14 years old during those years, and I'd come home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they never with any concern about anything. Again, those were some pretty easy, fun years in Israel. Difficult realities around us, but the streets were very, very safe, and it was great being a street rat.
I've heard Leon Joseph quoted as saying that he and your father, Milt, really were 2 of the 3 or 4 guys that essentially built up the east side of Milwaukee and really fundamentally changed the housing situation. Having left this very successful business and gone to Israel, what did your parents do? It's a great question. It's probably one of my father's favorite things to talk about. Is he's got a very simple answer that really is very powerful. If you look up and down Prospect Avenue and Farwell Avenue, those were all buildings that were bought and sold during the years my father moved to Israel. And there's no question that if he stayed here, whatever his wealth is today would have been tenfold had he stayed here. But his answer was very simple. You can't learn Hebrew and buy buildings at the same time. You can't have the experience in Bnei Brak of talking to Auschwitz survivors and taking the mortgages out on Prospect Avenue at the same time. You can't have the experience of raising a family to experience what it's truly like to live 2 cultures while you're investing in Showood. Those were simply 2 things that were diametrically opposed, not because they negated one or the other, but just you couldn't do them both at the same time. And in hindsight, he did pretty well anyway. Now, interestingly enough, Leon went ahead and formed another partnership and did phenomenally well and very successful in that second partnership as well. But till today, they're best of friends. They talk, pretty regularly. Their businesses are still very much thriving. And I think in hindsight, my dad is very proud of his decision, probably as much today, if not more so today than ever. I'll put it to you in a very kind of maybe, I don't know if it's morbid, but there's something about it that maybe is a little sad, but I think very powerful. At my grandfather's, I was at my grandfather's grave 2, 3, 4 years ago. And all 11 of his grandchildren are going to either have gone to or are going to Jewish day schools. That's pretty rare. That all of his children and all of their grandchildren are still committed to Jewish life
to the next generation, I think I can thank my parents for that. My mother was a Jewish educator par excellence, always was, always will be. She was the quintessential mom in all of the best of senses. She was no less independent than her peers were, but very, very proud of being a mom and very, very proud of being a wife, and was a spectacular mom, a spectacular wife. Living in the years of the June Cleaver type thing, she probably fit that. My daughter was we had asked my mom to come to help us out with my son was born, and she came to our house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and her lipstick was already on. That's the way she did things.
Right.
There's just certain ways of doing things. Having said that, she was this incredibly doting, caring, like I said, a phenomenal educator. It was very easy for me to want to go into education with her as a teacher.
Well, when you speak about mother and wife, that segues very nicely into my next question.
Go for it.
Yeah, I know your wife, Deb. She really lights up the room when she walks in. So tell me a little bit about how you met, because she's from Chicago.
She's from Chicago.
And
it's actually it's a great. She dated my brother.
Okay.
And I met her actually at my sisters had a house on Lorna Bobbin Lake on the way out to Oconomowoc. And I was there with somebody else, and she was there with my brother, and we met that particular time, and really hit it off and really enjoyed each other's company. And a few weeks later, she was down in Florida with my brother, and I was there with my parents. And her brother took a long walk on the beach with a mutual family friend, and I sat on the beach with Deb for 2.5, 3 hours just talking, and really got to know her and really enjoyed her company. And that's basically the end. Should have where the story could have ended there. As it happens, I was at a jazz club one night, and I saw her walk in with this very tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, and thought, you know what, that's ridiculous. That's no competition. Why even try this? But I positioned myself just in the right place, that if she saw me and she was happy to see me, great, and if not, not. And as it worked out, it was very successful, and she was very happy to see me. And I said to her, I really just didn't want to call you because you dated my brother. And her line was, that limited your choice in Milwaukee, didn't it? And that was it. That was I haven't stopped dating her since then. She's awesome. Deb defines the concept of the apple not falling far from the tree. She had two wonderful parents. A father who was literally of the greatest generation. He was a survivor of Pearl Harbor. One was bombed. He was one of the Dirty Dozen. One of the guys who was taken out of jail because he slugged his superior officer because he called him a dirty Jew and was thrown into the jail for it. And was going to be court-martialed. But they needed fighters, and he was a ranger. They needed fighters to go and work, to go into battle in Southeast Asia. So they came into the jails, and they got the best of the best back out again. And he was one of those guys, and was wounded, and received a Purple Heart, and was one of these just amazing, amazing guys. Bought his first home on the GI Bill. Was a window dresser for a profession. Always had enough to make his family very, very decent life, but never really had much of anything. Nothing at the end. By the end of life, he had very little left over, except that he had a magnificent relationship with his wife. They were literally holding hands to their dying breath. She was from that same greatest generation. Wonderful, wonderful couple. I'm a very, very lucky person. I look back and think of who I could have married, and who I got to marry. I married very, very well.
I would agree.
Yeah, she's awesome, and she's kind of surprised at herself with how great a mom she's turned out to be. She was, in her, 4th, 5th, 6th month of pregnancy, saying, "I'm not sure about this. Am I going to be a good mom?" And as the hormones increased, so did her fear. And
sure.
She's awesome.
Well, you're making this easy for me, because that segues nicely into my next question, which is, you have two beautiful children, Sydney and Gabe. Tell me a little bit about them, briefly, their personalities, their dispositions, because when you talk about the apple falling not far from the tree, when I look at you and Deb and everything in your home, and I see your kids, it's very apparent the environment that they're growing up in.
There's several places in our text that talk about that a person's name becomes who they are, or they become what their name is. I guess either way the story is told, this works out quite nicely. Sydney was named after her grandpa Charles. We don't know his Hebrew name. Actually, on Deb's side of the family, my children are 7th generation American, which is really pretty spectacular. They came here late 17, early 1800s. Pittsburgh was their background, and that's where they had been for many, many years. So she's named after him. The other person she's named after, which is only why we have C for Sydney and played with her name spelling and the like, but she's also named after a man by the name of Cush, who was a nickname of a man who homesteaded several thousand acres in the foothills of the Tortolino Mountains in Tucson, Arizona. A true cowboy. I mean, one of these people that really was, wore a six-gun at his side, but his entire house was, what wasn't windows, was bookshelves. And I just loved the hell out of him when I was a kid and thought that someday if I could ever have anybody that could be honoring him. So when Sydney was born, we came up with the name Cush to be her middle name honoring him. But she's also got a Hebrew name. Her Hebrew name is Sinai, for all the right reasons. For a really spectacular just place in the world that really, as far as geographic location, Sinai is a pretty spectacular place. But it's also where a lot of our origins are from, a lot of where we really became a people, that we didn't just wander there for no reason. We wandered there to really become what we could be as a Jewish people, and I hope that Sydney can someday do that. The flip side of that is it's one hell of a load to put on a kid. So she gets to be Cush a lot more than she gets to be Sydney, at least in my world. She's just incredibly... Sydney, something really cool happened when she was born. She was literally born, and within minutes she was in Deb's arms. And Deb said, "Sydney," and we have, both of us, which actually the doctor was equally as amazed. Sydney literally just physically turned her head and looked up at Deb, which is what's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be responsive that way, but that's the way Sydney's always been. She's a very responsive, very intuitive. She gets the world happening around her. She's awesome. She also likes your kid, so it doesn't hurt. Then there's Gabe. Gabe is Gabe because it's a name we both love. It works because the name Gabriel is a pretty powerful person in our own history. But he's Gabe. He's got his own very, very unique personality. He is incredibly artistic. He is incredibly... he has an image in his mind. He can take that image and put it on paper, and he's been able to do that since he's a little kid. His newest thing now is he takes these pieces of paper and he creates room scenes, almost like an interior designer. He's got a keen sense of humor that's just wonderful. Great. He's a phenomenal gymnast. Was a regional champion and a state champion in gymnastics. And his middle name is Ephraim. And if there's two pretty spectacular heroes, it's Gabriel and Ephraim. But you take the two of them together and something very strange happened, and this has to be by no fault. They're named Ephraim Sinai, was a cousin of ours in Israel. And I honestly didn't put this together, at least knowingly, I didn't ever put this together. Ephraim Sinai moved to Israel in the 1920s from Europe, from the quintessential place from Austria, from Vienna. A true Viennese Jew, living a unbelievably spectacular life there. Moved to Israel and lived in the Gaza Strip when in fact there was literally no running water. They used to collect water in skins, and became one of Israel's probably greatest eye surgeons. In fact, he was involved with Moshe Dayan's eye surgery. He was one of the consultants in the room at the time. He was one of my other childhood idols, and I never really realized that I ended up naming my two children Ephraim Sinai, which was what his name was, until, I don't know, my mom brought it up to my attention one day. She says, "Well, how did you not know that?" It's like, duh. So maybe it was done mistakenly, but obviously very purposefully. So I've got two great kids.
Yes, you
working
do.
Thank you.
And one of the things that strikes me about your children is how kind they both are. And that's evident when you first meet them at the awkward preteen years. To have children that are kind and articulate and warm is really special. So I hope you guys are very
Thanks.
proud.
We are.
So shifting gears a little bit, you have been a de facto mentor to me and many of my peers in our community work as we sort of find our way in the community and sort of hide our weaknesses and utilize our strengths. How did you get involved in the community as a young person? What were the catalysts for your involvement, and then how did it transfer into your real, true, inherent community leadership now?
First, thanks. It's humbling every time it's said. So, we moved back to the States, and I was 15 years old, and quite bluntly did not find my place in Milwaukee. My friends were riding Schwinn bicycles and playing tennis, and I had come through the Yom Kippur War. My friends were living a very comfortable, happy life, and I knew one of the guys who was killed in the Munich Olympic raids. So there's a certain duality of lives that I was trying to figure out how to put together, and when you're 15, it's not easy. So I got involved with the youth group. The only youth group in town that made any sense to me at the time was Beitar. It was a right-wing group of guys who got together to basically talk about Zionism and Judaism and Jewish pride, and talked about Hadar, which is this kind of an honor you're supposed to live by. And there was something about having that kind of a background that propped me back up again to give me what I thought I was losing by not being in Israel I could actually have here. The problem with it is, the great news is we brought Begin to Milwaukee in '77 before he became prime minister, and that was a spectacular experience in my life to actually meet and to actually know the person who would someday become, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest prime ministers of Israel, if not the greatest prime minister of all times. Very humble, very special, very unique man. And I think that's maybe part of the answer to one part of your questions is I look back and I've been very, very blessed with really great people impacting parts of my life. Begin being one of them, Kush, the person that my daughter's named after, Siegfried Rosengart, the art dealer I spoke about before in Europe, Betzalel Israeli, who was one of these, actually he's Uri Israeli, Israel's, Milwaukee's first shaliach's brother was Betzalel, my father's dear friends. He was one of the founders of a kibbutz in Israel, and so I have all these different pioneer and very formative experiences with people who were very strong people who never lived a very loud life. They just lived very strong lives, very productive lives, very wanting lives, very full lives. So I guess to a certain degree, all of them impacted on me, and then I grew up with two parents like that as well. So when you're 15 years old and you're kind of floundering around, you're joining these youth group for the sake of trying to find your identity. I did so, but never really solidified it because then I was 15, and then I was 18, then I was in school, and I was out of school, and I wanted to go back to Israel, and I did. I went back to Israel from 1984 to '89. I served in the army, and I was a docent at the Dasser Museum in Israel, and had wonderful experiences, but found that I loved Israel too much to actually work there. And I hated the working environment in Israel. So I came back to the States and again found myself kind of not sure how I'm going to keep my passions, my identity, my Jewish pride alive when I'm living basically bluntly in the diaspora. How do you do that? And I was puzzled by it and I was challenged by it. And I think that's why as life and as time wore on, that's what really made me become more active, was that I needed to find where I could find my own identity in something that I really am very proud of. I love who we are. I can't imagine being anything other than what I am as a Jew. We're just an amazing people. So to want to do that for my own, what started out to be my own personal satisfaction became really for the satisfaction of us as a people. And it's fun, it's exciting, it's challenging to see the kind of things that we do in our community, whether it's local or national or international, and the impact we can make on it. It's not always fun raising money, but it's wonderful when you realize what you're raising money for. So.
In Kemach in Torah.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
One of the areas that we haven't touched on, which I know is a very, very fundamental part of your existence and an impact that you have on the community overall, is your role as an educator. Could you touch on how that came to be and how you always seem to manage to keep that as a component in your life, and just touch on that a little bit?
I think that having these people who have impacted me, my mom, these other mentors, whether they knew they were mentors or not, they were. And having teachers who weren't good teachers. They may have been amazing people. And because they were amazing people, they were great teachers. Many of us remember Koppel Weinstein was a phenomenal educator in the community. Terrible bad breath, but phenomenal educator. And I unfortunately remember. Yes.
Sure, I remember.
You unfortunately remember the bad breath as much as you remember the education, and that's not what Jewish education ought to be. Jewish education ought to be just fun and exciting and challenging and rewarding and everything that education is supposed to be. I took like the best of the teachers that I had, and I hopefully incorporated what they have, and took what the worst of the educators that I had and try to make sure I don't do what they did. And I love teaching. I love seeing that light go on in the kids' heads. Young, and by the way, kids up to 90 or 95. I had the honor of having Milt Ettenheim as a student of mine in a Melton class. And how great is it to have a person like him as your student? I mean, I learned as much from him as I taught him, probably more. Maybe because I really believe that adult Jewish education is adult Jewish education, that Jewish learning is lifelong and all that kind of stuff. And I really believe in that. There's something about teaching that's the idea of passing on what we've got. We've been nothing. We've been a tiny percentage of the world's population forever. But what we've given back is truly spectacular. And to educate others that that's what we're able to do. To go from people being people of one book to being people of hundreds of thousands of books. I was at the airport yesterday picking up near Barkin, and I walked into the section of the Renaissance used bookstore to see a section on Jewish books. And it's just one section is hundreds of books long. There's something about that that's just, we have good reason to be very proud of who we are. If any way I can pass it on from place to place. And I get to do it in great locations. I get to do it at our day school. I get to do it at a JCC. I get to do it here at the Federation. I'm teaching a part of this docents class for our own Jewish museum. You know, the potential, there's a great line that says, teachers affect eternity, they never know when their education begins and ends. You know, the potential that someday, you know, my nursery school teacher, Mrs. Dummert, or Mrs. Van de Zandy, or Mrs. Olson, all these, you know, these early educators, you know, the idea that they're still impacting me and I'm impacting others, there's something about that just nice.
You never quite matriculate.
No, you don't. You never get to really graduate. It's
So
kind of like rentals. The same thing with rentals. I never get to finish renting all the units. I never get to finish educating
There's
everybody
no
want
such
to
thing as
educate.
100%
Never
occupancy.
exactly. Same thing with education.
Right.
You just never seem to get it done.
That's right. Out of my own personal curiosity, I'm going to ask you to briefly define some terms.
Love to.
Tell me what they mean to you. Tzedakah.
Pursuing justice, doing the right thing. It's a mitzvah in the form of a commandment, not because it always feels good. I love teaching the difference between tzedakah and charity. That gravitas, the concept of charity, is that it feels good to do so, and you do so the goodness of your heart. That's not what tzedakah is all about, because even when you don't want to do it, you have to do it. Even when things happening around you aren't just, you have to be just. Even when things around you aren't the way they're supposed to be, you still have to do the right thing. I love the fact that we're commanded to do things without asking why. And when you find out why, they turned out pretty well. So that's my tzedakah.
The term shanda.
Something I wish we didn't
Feel
have.
free to give examples.
Something I wish we didn't have any more of. Shanda, an embarrassment, a large communal embarrassment. It's one thing when you have a shanda and you kind of blush and it dissipates a couple of minutes later. A shanda. Shanda is the way the non-Jewish community behaved vis-a-vis the wants and needs of the Jewish community in Milwaukee. Was an absolute shanda. We are unbelievable neighbors and unbelievable members in this community. And the fact that we were treated in Whitefish Bay for the build-out of our land, to do what we wanted to do for our future, and for that matter, for the future of the community we were living in. That's a shanda. It's a good example.
Define the phrase acharai.
I guess I wish I would have been one of the commanders in Israel's elite army units, because it would have been a great thing to have yelled that out. I'd like to believe, and maybe your compliment proves it, that I'd like to think that maybe there's people following me anyway. But let's face it, I'm not. The Yoni Netanyahu was. The David was. The Marty Stein was. There are those who have been the true trailblazers in our life, who were follow me, do as I say as well as I do. Unbelievable role models. It's a horrible statistic that Israel has lost more officers statistically than any other armies of world history, because they do not just yell out, follow me, not just after me, but follow me. That they are the first ones into battle, and unfortunately oftentimes the first one to lose, or to be lost.
I would say that literally and metaphorically, people follow you.
Thanks.
The fight in the diaspora is different.
It is. It is. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder what it would have been if I still lived in Israel. there's also not a day that goes by that I'm not proud of what I think is happening here in Milwaukee. No, let me change that for what I know is happening here in Milwaukee. There are some pretty spectacular things happening here, both federated and non-federated. I love the fact that we have a very, very vibrant federated Jewish community in Milwaukee, through the JCC, through everything we have. And that's our day schools, and it's a Jewish Family Services, and the Jewish Home and Care Center, and it's a federation, obviously, in the biggest of senses and the smallest of senses. But I also like the fact that there's members of our community who aren't necessarily affiliated with that, but also still have very strong Jewish identity nonetheless. There's people who are in this building at different times who you never really see under any circumstances elsewhere, but they just keep on appearing in different places. You'll go to have a Jewish Family Services event for the needs of our community, and bam, there they are again, people that you never see before. My in-laws had a very, very sad ending in their life where they really needed the support of the community around them in Chicago, and there was nothing to turn to. And Chicago, I guess, technically raises more money than we do, but proportionally we put them to shame. And had they been in Milwaukee, I know that it could have called, it's one lift of one receiver, and we could have gotten dozens of responses to what their needs were in Milwaukee, and that's spectacular. It's a great thing we got going here.
As we talk about our community, which I think has the highest, if not one of the highest, rates of day school
enrollment. Yeah.
Enrollment. We've just embarked in the process of completing a capital campaign that's completely changed the physical infrastructure of our community and strengthened it for decades to come. As a catalyst and a major part of that growth, in your role as a community leader in a variety of organizations, if you could sprinkle some magic dust and make a change without just push a button, what would that be?
There was true brilliance in figuring out just how much we needed to go for with this capital campaign. But interestingly enough, we can't forget that simultaneous to it, within a short time before and a short time after, the Jewish Home and Care Center is having their own capital campaign, and Jewish Family Services had their own capital campaign. And they were all successful, which is really just an amazing concept. And we're talking about literally raising over $60 million or $80 million. I mean, the numbers are staggering. We need that kind of vision to see where we're going to go in the future, not just physically, but we're going to go physically. Now that we've got the buildings built, what's our future going to look like at the day school? What's our future going to look like at the JCC? What's our future going to look like at the Federation vis-a-vis leadership? What's the young leadership efforts we're going to put in to make sure that we have guys like you forever there, forevermore? We need to have a vision that says, yes, we've got 30% of our eligible Jewish kids are in Jewish day schools, but what does that mean? How are we going to continue that? We need to make the Milwaukee Jewish Day School, Yeshiva Elementary School, Hillel, or the Academy, New Jewish Beginnings, the day school, preschool, JCC preschool, totally affordable to every Jewish kid who wants to go there, not just those who can afford it or can't afford it, because there's a population that is desperately in need of our help, who are that literally poor middle class, and they're not poor. They technically they fall between the cracks. They don't make enough money to afford to be able to go to the day school, but they make too little money or too much money to afford to be scholared or to get scholarships. That's unacceptable. We need to figure out what we're going to do with them. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with all of the issues that confront diaspora Jewry. Whether it's how do we continue Jewish identity, do we continue to do it through Jewish camping? What's our Jewish camping experience going to look like over the course of the next several years? Our Israel experiences have to be looked at much more closely. So we need some real, true, visionary time spent. Now that we've spent the money, we need to figure out how we're going to do it the next level.
So in a prioritization of the needs of the community.
Yeah, but not one that simply is based on economic, because the reality is special needs, as an example, will rise to the top of that level. The frail elderly will rise to the top of that level. Those are the growing, obvious populations that will need our help. Some of these are areas that are not obvious that need our help. It's hard to put money into a family that makes $125,000 a year. But if we don't, we may lose their kids. We know that there's 4 pillars that keep Jewish life going. It's day school experiences, an Israel experience, a Jewish family life, and synagogue affiliation. camping experience. Did I say camping? Camping experience has to be in there. Without those 4 pillars, it's hard. And the reality is that more and more Jewish families today simply can't afford a day school and a camp experience, an Israel trip and a JCC affiliation, or a synagogue affiliation and a federation gift. I mean, these are very, very complicated things. It is not cheap to be Jewish anymore, and we got to figure out a way of how to do that better. And there's no question that our Jewish Community Foundation dollars are spectacular. I mean, we're one of the finest in the country in that level. And I'm sure as time goes on, more and more of those monies will be needed to be spent on that. But we've got a long list of needs.
We've got some recalibrating.
Yeah, we probably do.
So do you have any visions of the community that Sydney and Gabe are going to grow up in as they become young adults?
I would imagine if you sat my father down here and my grandfather down here and my great-grandfather down here, they would probably all say the same thing, that they're very worried about their futures. Or they were worried about each one of their children's futures. Socially, I'm very worried about my kids' futures. We're living in a very, very violent, very, very scary world in many cases. And Sydney's at the age now where she wants to go to Summerfest. My answer would be yes, on a leash. That's not an answer I want to give her. I want to let Sydney run and fly free anywhere she wants to go, anywhere, at any time. But that's not the community we live in anymore. We shelter them at our day school. We shelter them at our camps. We shelter them at our JCC. We shelter them at the different places we go to because that's the role parents have. There's a wonderful Hebrew song, a Hebrew poem that talks about it's Uf Gozal, fly and be free, you young, basically young bird. And we all want them to leave the nest at some point and fly and be free out there. But it's a scary world they're living in. I really believe that much of what we're doing in our own little cocoon hopefully will give them the kind of confidence they're going to have. I mean, I look at Sydney as an example. She's old enough so I can reflect better on her age-wise. She is an extremely independent young woman. Just amazing to see what she's willing to do on her own. And I don't think she's going to take, shit from anybody. And that's good. That's great. The fact, I'm very, very proud of the fact that Deb and I have been able to give her that kind of confidence, that kind of independence. But the reality is there are some very, very scary people in the world that could really cut that down without her ever thinking twice. And that's scary. That's very, very scary. I've jokingly said that she can date when she's 31 as long as Gabe is with her. Maybe the same thing can be said about Gabe, that he can start dating when he's 31 as long as Sydney is with him. I'm worried about him. I think any dad that wouldn't be is foolish. On the other hand, there's a scene that we used in Sydney's last frame of her bat mitzvah montage, right? The famous thing that every family can't wait to put together. And I love the fact that Deb picked it out. It's a photo of Gabe on one side and Sydney on the other, and we're walking away, and it was at Disneyland, Disney World. And it's a great photo because it's the kind of thing that I think every dad wants to just like kind of hang on for as long as possible. And
freeze that frame.
Yeah, absolutely. So it would be really nice to be able to do that.
What is your relationship with Israel now that you and Deb have a family, and obviously you have a business that you run, and you have responsibilities here?
We go there, physically we go there 1, 2, 3 times a year, depending on the year. This year will only be once. We were there for my Sydney's bat mitzvah celebration in November. I'll be going back for Nir Barkin, our community shliach, one of our former community shliachim's graduation from rabbinical school in November again. So we go back as often as we can. It's a relationship that's very difficult because to me Israel always will be my home. The reality is that the day-to-day workings of Israel are no longer home to me, which is very strange. I know who all the radio personalities are in Milwaukee. Whether I listen to them or not, you know who they are. You know who's writing in the local newspapers. You know what columns you like to read or don't like to read in the local newspapers, if they're not even national newspapers. Israel is a very, very fast-paced society, so when you're not there to keep up with that, you lose out on everything. The music that I'm used to is somewhat older Israel. Yeah, I get the new sounds, and I like the new sounds, and I dance to the new sounds, although my daughter and son think it's kind of funny because I'm too old to be dancing.
And you probably weren't that good to begin
but I
with.
probably wasn't that good exactly. At least, I actually won some competitions, and I was my
we'll come
teens.
back to that.
No, please, let's not come back to that. But anyway, there was
So music is no longer, I mean, it still plays a part in the whole thing, and it's even the hot stuff, but I would rather listen to like the classic Israeli music, the Arik Einstein, the Mickey Gabrielov, the guys who were the Shlomo Artzis. They're, thank God, still alive and still pumping out music, but they're like our Mick Jaggers and they're our James Taylors. They're not necessarily the top 40 anymore, but they will always be in the top 40 of time, I guess, is what it comes down to. It's also the place that I go back to recharge. Israel is very much a place that gives me new, as they say in Hebrew, koach, or Yiddish, keach. Otzma. I get that. I do. I just get that. Get the battery charged. We've got, for Sydney's bat mitzvah celebration, we had, I don't know, 80 to 90 people at her parties and Torah reading and the like. Those were mostly Israelis. There were a good chunk of us that came from Milwaukee. I don't know, 10, 15, 20 families. No, 20 people, 15 people. But the majority of them were Israelis. We've had wonderful experiences. We've gone over Pesach to Israel because I get sick every so often of saying next year in the rebuilt city of Jerusalem. So we go to Jerusalem, we go to Israel to say that at the end of the meal. On 2 different occasions, we took a bunch of friends, 25 people, went we just took over a couple of bed and breakfasts in the northern part of Israel and southern part of Israel, 2 different years. You wake up every morning and there your best friends are waking up with you every morning. There's something about that that's just really amazing. It's also really neat to see how friends of friends have now become family. Nir moved back to Israel and just officiated at the grandnephew of the first Shliach of Milwaukee. That's cool. That's really cool history. That's great.
In closing, tell me a little bit about what your strategy is for Moshe Katz to strengthen and grow our community. What is your role? What are your strengths?
I'd like to think that as an educator I've got some insight as to what we can and can't do. Really, in the tachlis, in the simplest of senses, educationally. What can we do pedagogically? What can we do to really grow our community in knowledge and in strength and in ability? Which is why I was so honored to be asked to be part of the docent program. I was so honored to be a Melton teacher. I'm so honored to be a day school teacher. So there's that side of it. That strictly and for the sake of curriculum building, I love the idea that I've got some kind of role in that in our community. Bluntly, look, I'm very lucky to be a person who can afford to donate and to be part of our giving community. I'd like to think that also allows me some flexibility and ability to say we need to spend our money wisely. And I've got some pretty amazing heroes in Milwaukee to work with. I've got some wonderful Jerry Steins and like I said, Marty Stein may rest in peace, and Esther Leah Ritz may she rest in peace, and Mark Brickman and the Bert Bilskis and the people who have really made this community this amazing place to be at, that had the vision to see what we can do economically. The ability of Rick to sit and solicit money from people who are the heavy hitters in town is wonderful. The Betsy and Michael. I mean, I could. The list is endless. I probably made a mistake by starting it because I can't finish it. So there's that role that I hope I can also step into to be a person who's not just a donor, but in fact hopefully makes those kind of decisions in life as well. I think the other part is just that familial side, though. I think when it's all said and done, I want to be a great dad. I want to be the role model that I hope my parents were to me, that I hope I am to my kids. There's another crude joke that I won't share, but the punchline is that if you do it one at a time, that's all the difference you need. Is that to wake up every morning and go swimming at the JCC and start my day there with that kind of a background, with Michael Kleiner with a number on his arm, and who's a survivor of Auschwitz, and to see him on a treadmill. How can you not start a day? That's life. To have the Louis Kopolovich, a drugstore on the 60th in the old south side of Milwaukee, and to have him as one of my mentors in life, and to see his success story. One of Louis' family members got married. I don't remember which one. I think it was a niece got married, and all of Louis' family except for a brother and a sister were killed off in the Holocaust. And at this photo shoot, there's a large family contingency of the next generation that survived in the third generation. And there's this huge family picture. And if that wasn't a screw you Hitler, I don't know what was. So the fact that we can live so livingly, I mean, life's so large. I guess that's what what I'm hoping for, is to live a large Jewish life, to really live it big and not loud, but to live it big and live it well.
Thank you. Thanks
This
for
was
your time.
awesome. Thank you.
And
to you.
I look forward to
Chazak
doing this
Amatz.
again in 10 years.
I'd be honored.
Thanks again.
Can we reverse it?
Yeah.
Pleasure listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Boy, you set a high standard.
Well, I need to please.